Good evening, everybody. My name is Adam Shoemaker, and I'm rector here at St. Stephen's, and on behalf of our congregation, I welcome you to our final Sunday evening lecture of this programmatic year, which is an evening of poetry by our own Eugene Platt, who has just written a new compendium of poetry titled Weaned on War. Thank you very much to parishioner Walker Smith, who will help to moderate this evening's activities. And you're all welcome following to a reception in Stevens Hall. But before we get going, let us begin with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, be ever present with your servants who seek through poetry and prose to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth, and grant to them even now glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. And we ask this for love's sake. Amen. And with that, I turn it over to Walker Smith.
Ten, 9, 8. Howdy. How's everybody? Wow. You guys are dead. Come on. How's everybody? All right. Okay. Good. It's a long day, I know. We've had a barbecue and a nice service. But thanks, everybody, for coming tonight for this special evening of a poetry reading by our very own Eugene Platt, who is with us. I'm really looking forward to it. I think this is going to be fun and rewarding and inspirational. There is a line in one of my favorite Van Morrison songs that reads like this. It goes, quote, "There's a dream where the contents are visible, where the poetic champions compose." So I just love this line. A dream where the contents are visible. I actually don't think there's any better description of poetry than that. And I have to confess, as some of you may know who have been to our house and have seen, I'm a little bit of a poetry nerd, so I've just never gotten over that college experience of discovering T.S. Eliot and Auden and Keats and Dickey and Whitman and Dickinson and Ginsberg and so many others, including Eugene's favorite poet, William Butler Yeats. That is your favorite poet, right, Eugene? In fact, in high school, I was obsessed with E.E. Cummings, so it was really wonderful, actually, to make another poetry discovery when we joined St. Stephen's, and that is the discovery of our very own poet, Eugene Platt. He is widely published. He has a new book out that Adam mentioned called Weaned on War, a collection of his life's work with a foreword by our rector, Adam. You can find a copy at Buxton Books downtown. We tried to get Buxton out here tonight. But we couldn't. But the book is certainly available at Buxton on King Street. Several of Eugene's poems have been choreographed and performed by dance companies in residence at the College of Charleston here. Some have been shortlisted for awards, including the highly prestigious Pushcart Prize. He was the first poet laureate of the town of James Island, and Eugene has read his work in years past at Piccolo Spoleto, which he will do again this year as part of the Sundown series at 6 p.m. Thursday, June 1st, 6 p.m. Thursday, June 1st, in Washington Square Park, which is on Broad Street between Meeting and Church. It's actually my favorite little green space here in the downtown. And it's free, so please come for that reading as well. As most of you know, Eugene was born and raised here in the area known as St. Andrew's Parish, or the parish, which, by the way, was one of the original 10 Anglican parishes established by the South Carolina Commons House of Assembly in 1706. Eugene is also a novelist and a playwright, and his coming-of-age novel, St. Andrew's Parish, is also available at Buxton Books, and it draws inspiration from his boyhood here in the Low Country. And that's one of the threads running through Eugene's work, his own life experience and what it has taught him. But the other thread is Eugene's faith. And in the foreword to St. Andrew's Parish, he explained that, quote, "Inasmuch as religion is a central component of Southern culture, the matter of faith could not be ignored in the writing of that book." And this is true of his poetry as well. So Eugene's journey of faith has been his journey of life. And tonight, we're going to get a glimpse of that journey. Our program is divided into 4 parts. Part 1 is a few poems about Eugene's life as a boy. Part 2, his life as a father. Part 3, his life as a believer, or as Eugene likes to make a point of saying, a questioning believer. And then at the end, Eugene will debut a brand new poem, never read or published before, entitled The Church of the Crooked Cross. And at the end of each part of our program, I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask Eugene a question about those poems, and then we'll open it up to the floor for a question or two from you if you have any. So please ask questions, and then we will move, from there to the next part. Eugene will introduce his poems, read them for us, and then at the end, don't forget about the reception. By the way, the material that you have here is not all of the poems that Eugene will read tonight, but it is some of the longer poems, so it's easier to follow along. And if we get the opportunity, I'm going to ask one complicated question about one of the poems, Adam's Lament. So it would be helpful just to sort of look at that as Eugene talks about it. Thanks again. Going to have a great evening of poetry, and we're going to start now with part 1, Eugene's life as a boy. So to repeat part of Van Morrison's lyric, please join me in welcoming our very own poetic champion, Eugene Platt.
Thank you, Father Adam, for allowing us to do this. Thank you very much, Walker, for a memorable introduction. I didn't know I was that good, but
I'm gonna move your mic down just a bit.
okay.
Yeah. How's he doing? How's the sound?
How's the sound? Okay. Thank each and every one of you for being here. So as Walker said, I'll start with 2 or 3 poems come out of childhood. And a short poem that's not in the selection that you were given, titled My Father. One word might be a little off-putting, but look at it in the context of the poem. It's titled My Father, but as it turned out, and you'll see in a poem I'll read a bit later, this father was my dad, wonderful dad, but not my birth father, but we'll come to that a little later. Poem about the dad who raised me, who was a machinist at the Charleston Naval Shipyard, and here it is. My father. My father, the musician, singing "You Are My Sunshine" and making melodies on a Sears and Roebuck guitar. My father, the machinist, as conscientious at the Navy Yard as at home, putting his best into a perfectly meshing gear. My father, the lover, too tired too often to say it, working his ass off to show he cared. My father, the good neighbor, sad and somber after nearly getting stricken Mr. Crabtree to the emergency room in time. My father, the faithful deacon at Ashley River Baptist Church, instilling in me daily the wisdom of honoring the golden rule. And now, a longer poem. It's in the packet. Eat strawberries and seize the day. When I was a little boy growing up Baptist and a bountiful part of the bucolic South, not yet susceptible to carnal sin or more. At best, being churched was a holy chore. But on summer Sundays, at least, my salvation from hours of fire and brimstone was coming home to feast on fried chicken, white rice, and brown gravy, and my mother's renowned strawberry shortcake. Long before I started school and ever knew how to spell strawberries, my mother grew some of the best and sweetest in South Carolina. Never using berries from a store or whipped cream squirted from a can to make her cakes, her heirloom manual mixer was too handy. I would know because I got to scrape the bowl. So blessed to be born before the aerosol era. Besides berries, she grew cucumbers and corn, radishes and rutabagas, turnips and tomatoes, okra and onions, lima beans and lettuce. So much produce, she'd often say roundly, "Lord, let us be thankful for your bounty." And Dad, never one to be outdone, would add a carpe diem. "This is a day the Lord did make. We will rejoice and be glad for strawberry shortcake." No longer so naive as that dutiful little boy, I ponder the story of a beguiling apple and wonder if it was just Adam's unfortunate lust, after all, for a virginal strawberry that precipitated the fall. I am beholden, nonetheless, to my devout mother and faithful father for all they taught me, especially how to pray, and regardless of the harvest, feast or famine, come what may, to seize the day. Do we have a question at this point?
I can ask a question. Are you going to read grandfather, or shall I? Are you going to read grandfather?
I'm sorry, which one?
Grandfather?
I will. It's a short poem.
Sorry.
Grandfather. It's a short poem. Before the stroke and all kinds of cancers, wearing with dignity his crown of age, our grandfather had all the answers. To his family, he was like a sage. Now he's silent, but still we ask the eternal question, as curious children always will, with love and without hesitation. Papa wanted to live. He prayed, really tried. So if God's so good, why did he let him die? With the patient wisdom of mothers, I was replied, because, well, God knew he needed to say goodbye.
There we go. Thank you very much. Life as a boy. So I'm going to start with a question, and then we'll take some questions from you. So Eugene, I actually think sometimes people just want to know how writers get ideas and find inspiration. And a lot of your poems, certainly the ones that you just read, come from your past and your upbringing in the church. So that seems to inform a lot of your work. Yet each poem is kind of a bit of a reflection on those memories, not just the memories per se. So I'm just kind of interested in your process, how you bring these things together, your life experience and the inspiration that you get from that, and then turn it into to something poetic. Could you talk a little bit about the process you go through?
Well, to begin with, Walker, if I knew the answer, I would be much more prolific than I am. I guess it's during the 1970s I was fairly active in what they call the Pulse in the Schools program, which usually involved week-long residencies at schools at various levels, and I always opted for high school. And typically it's had a week-long residency, and the first day of the week I'd go in and tell the students that we'd be writing some poems during the week, and naturally they'd say, well, we don't have anything to write about, don't know what I could possibly write. And I would turn around immediately, and on a blackboard I would write the 3 E's, the letter E. emotions, encounters, experiences, trying to convince them that no one can go through, well, if not every day, certainly in any given week, everyone has an experience, an emotional experience that could be a kernel for a poem, and I think that happened with some of my most successfully realized poems. By that term, successfully realized, that I end up with what I hoped to accomplish when I started writing it. And in the next segment, as a father, I tell you, expound on that for the poem, New Priorities. I got a late start as far as poets who have any recognition concerned. I didn't begin writing in earnest until I think it was about 28. And at that time, I was living in Washington, D.C. Let's say it was 1968, the spring of 1968. And within a relatively short space of time, maybe within a month, both my father, my dad, who was down here in Charleston, he was in his final weeks of dealing with emphysema. He died. It was April of '68. And a very intense romantic involvement I had with a lovely young woman in Washington came to a sudden end. So those twin traumatic experiences left a lot of pent-up emotions, and without any sense I was writing poems, I just started writing down, scribbling actually, what I was feeling. And I was sharing a big house with some fellows in Washington, and so some of my housemates saw my scribblings and I said, "Man, this is good stuff. You ought to get it published." And I said, "Gee, maybe it does have some potential." So I began thinking of what I was doing is writing poetry, and began sending poems out to magazines, trying to get some published. And I accumulated, I think, 40 rejection slips before I got the first poem published. But I'll never forget that day when an acceptance came in, and such encouragement that was. Anyhow, I persevered, and
that's great. So Brad, 40 rejections for one acceptance, that's a pretty good ratio, isn't it? Better than average. Yeah, good. Questions? Anybody have any questions? Yeah, Michael, let me give you the microphone.
Yes, Eugene, have you ever been approached by any musicians here, local talent, looking to put music to any of your poems?
I haven't, but I would like that. I guess the closest thing to that is that Walker mentioned in his introduction that some of the poems have been choreographed, and I don't know anything about choreography, but the late Bob Ivy, who was the artistic director of the Robert Ivy Ballet, which during the, I guess the 80s mainly into maybe the early 90s, was the resident dance company at the College of Charleston. I think he choreographed 8 of my poems, and that was a really, really heady experience because poetry is, let's face it, poetry is a red-haired stepchild of American arts. And whenever a poem can be given a new life, as it were, either through dance or music, it's unusual, but it's very flattering and exciting. So, but anyhow, Michael, feel free if you'd like any of my poems to have my full blessing to put them to music. So.
Yes,
okay.
Marty, let me bring the microphone to you.
So this is a comment more than a question, but Eugene, when you drift over that way, I can't hear you as well as I can when you stand right over the mic.
Very well, I'll push this a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions, comments? So Eugene, before we move on to your next section, life as a father, I want to just ask you a quick question about the poem that's in the materials here, Eat Strawberries. You kind of suggest that Adam's fall from grace was actually lusting for a virginal strawberry. So I'm not sure if you meant that playfully or if you were sort of commenting on what you describe in the poem as the quote, the bountiful part of the bucolic South, as maybe more of a temptation to to us than anything else.
Yeah,
Am I reading too much into this?
Well,
I hope so.
I grew up in a rather devout Southern Baptist home, and my dad was fundamentalist, and there was never any doubt in his mind that the original sin was one of sexual intercourse, and this indirect disobedience of God's will, and metaphorically becomes an apple, although I don't think apple is actually mentioned in the scriptures, it's fruit. But Adam, tempted by a woman, disobeyed God, and so we have all of his trials and tribulations, millennia afterwards. So really, that's the genesis for that particular image.
Good. Okay, our second section, and watch that microphone. Yes, Michael, yes.
So we talk about original sin and man tempted by woman. If he hadn't been tempted, none of us would be here. So you talk about the difficult lives we have afterwards. There would have been no afterwards if they hadn't eaten of that tree. So I always thought that maybe God had it in mind. Of all the trees of the garden, he says, don't eat of that one. He didn't have to point that out. He puts that right in the presence of their own desire to do as children, which they are, exactly what Daddy says not to do. So I have a feeling it was all in his mind, and Eve is the hero of this story. She got us out of perpetual childhood. And if we enjoy life, there's a lot of joy to life, thank her.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Michael. And my observations were hopefully taken as they intended to be somewhat facetiously. As I said,
thank God for the strawberry.
I grew up, with fundamentalist parents, and that's my orientation. I'd like to think I've gone beyond it a bit, but certainly not as far as you have. In the second section, poems come to my life as a parent. There's a poem that's on this bookmark, and I have some of these bookmarks over at the reception. It's titled New Priorities. It's probably my best known poem. And talking about inspiration, Walker, when my now 50-year-old daughter was an infant sleeping in a crib, there were countless nights when I'd go in to check on her, as parents do, checking on the kids and babies particularly. And I guess there was one particular night, and I can't remember now specifically whether it was one night or maybe a composite of a number of nights, but seeing her sleeping peacefully in the crib was a genesis for New Priorities. My preoccupation is no longer empires. I tiptoe in darkness to witness your blankets rise and fall. Then, bending over the slats of your crib that remain silent centuries through the night, I become reacquainted with the God I knew in my youth and say a wordless prayer for your future, which is the future of all the world, while listening for the sweetest sound I have ever heard, your breathing. The next poem, titled A Somber Day in San Francisco, about my son who lives out there. He had to have his beloved cat euthanized a few years ago, and because I love cats, I could have empathy with his sorrow. And there's a reference in the poem to a church holiday, I guess, that they celebrate, and with a lot of Spanish-speaking people, Dia de los Muertos, Day of those are dead. A Samba Day in San Francisco. Yes, son, a Samba Day in San Francisco, so it was. Your heart as heavy as fog pouring in from the Pacific. Somehow even the Golden Gate seemed to weep. Somehow, Smokey, your cherished cat, had come to the end of a life that we can only hope was not his ninth. Well over a year, you've known the end was inevitable, so take comfort in rich remembrance of the good times, not least the memory made at McLaurin Park the day you played together for the last time. Once online, your endearing video went viral. Yesterday, you must have been hard put to get out of bed, to lift your head, to put one foot in front of the other. Meanwhile, on the other side of a wide continent, you are, as they say, in our thoughts and prayers. Your mother's and my condolences enfold you. It's no cliche to say no one has ever had a better son. Please know I take paternal pride in how you rose to the pinnacle of compassion anyone can show for a beloved pet, shortening your time together in order to end his malignancy-linked misery. For a tortured week, you wrestled with a vet's advice, then, night before last, fighting to hold back your tears, you found the resolve to let Smokey go to a heavenly refuge. Imagine him in the company of countless kin, all stalking their prey in a park larger than 1,000 McLaurins, forever. Yes, son, a Samba Day in San Francisco, so it was, but tomorrow is Dias de los Muertos in Garfield Square, and I know you will be there to honor the dead. Over here in the South, we call it All Saints' Day. For St. Smokey, we will light a candle and say a prayer. Somehow even the Golden Gate seemed to weep. So take comfort in rich remembrance of the good times. Your mother's and my condolences enfold you. Please know I take paternal pride in how you found the resolve to let Smokey go to a heavenly refuge. Yes, son, a Samba Day in San Francisco, so it was. You want to go into the next section?
Okay, sure.
Unless
So
there are questions?
just to ask a question related to a Samba Day in San Francisco. So you've written a lot of poems about pets and your relationship with animals. So tell us a little bit about how the lives of your pets figure into your poetic expression of your faith and your relationship with God.
I said to someone, I think in a parish in the last week, could it have been you or Joy, who also has pets and has challenges with them and keeping them going, that I feel that pets are one of God's greatest gifts to us. And I can't articulate clearly how I feel, but it's like having pets and having pets live with us allows us another dimension rather than human civilization. It's almost like we're living in the wild, or something, especially with cats. And if you have an indoor-outdoor cat as we do, that it's remarkable how we can get involved. And you know this personally, and I imagine others, if you do as well, have had pets and have lost pets. I don't know what I would have done. 2 years ago, within the space of 2 months, Judith and I lost not only a loved corgi, I think that was November 2020, And then just 2 months later in January, a beloved little cat named Keats, with the dog, he was 12 or 13 years old and to be expected, but the cat was only 3 years old. And I was really distraught. And talking about tying this with fate, I can remember in the days after Keats died, took him to vet and he was euthanized. Terrible day, one of the worst days of my life. Anyhow, I can remember one morning sitting at the dining table beside the window and looking out. And for me, this is really something, shaking my fist at God. You know, how could you do this? Well, it was a bad time, and I don't know how I could have managed it without prayer support from Father Adam and Father Greg, who prayed with me several times. And I never forget one thing that Greg pointed out, and I won't say it made me feel good, but less bad. He said very simply, well, God's crying too, so.
Great. Yep. I was a little worried about asking that question.
I guess I do show it, even now.
Questions? Anyone have any questions for Eugene? Yes, please.
I want to thank you for that San Francisco poem. I've had that situation, as many people here have, of having to put down a beloved pet. And I think you capture the somber nature of it and the painful nature of it. And you speak for a great many people. T.S. Eliot, of course, loved cats and wrote many poems about them. They were not exactly the four quartets, but they were very nice. But in the book I gave you of the last poems of Robert Frost, called In the Clearing, he has what I would call a Christmas poem, in which he opens his door and a Dalmatian dog comes in. And he calls him Gusty. He realizes the Holy Spirit is visiting him in the form of a dog. And he tries to domesticate him, but then the dog moves on. God visits, and then he goes on to other people. And that is, I think, the most special poem I've ever read about having an animal in the house that can really teach you about God, the love of God, the love of a dog. I always thought it's not an accident that God is dog spelled backwards. These are two perfect loves. God will love you no matter what, and so will your dog. And hopefully so will your cat. Not always, but sometimes. But thank you so much for that poem.
And I cherish that gift, one of Robert Frost's collections, and tonight when I go home, I'm going to reread that. Thank you.
Eugene, can I ask you just one more quick question?
Mm-hmm.
So you read us two poems. One of them is about you kind of in the moment as you're watching your daughter sleep. So it is a poem about your feelings in that moment, whereas A Somber Day in San Francisco is more of a reflective poem that you've written with some time and distance, a little bit more, I think, kind of from the outside in. It struck me that a lot of the poems you write about life as a parent, life as a father, are kind of one or the other. How do you decide how you're going to sort of write a poem, like, you know, one way versus the other, the perspective or the point of view that you have in the poem?
Yeah, well, I could really respond as I did a while ago. If I knew the answer to this, that would be much more prolific. I approach poetry very intuitively, and sometimes it's just something that moves me, one of those emotions, encounters, or experience itself that moves me, and I don't know how I'm going to express it, but I put the pen to paper. Eventually something happens, and I never complete a poem in just one draft. And the final poem I read tonight, I think what you see is the 20th draft. So,
Great. Good. Well, let's move to the next part. And I think most of these poems are in the materials, are they not? The ones you're
Yes.
about to read? Yes.
Are we ready to
Yes, please. Yeah.
for Adam's Lament?
Yes.
Okay. Again, a poem that I guess reflects my Southern Baptist upbringing in terms of some of the images and the structure of the poem is one that I first saw in the work of James Dickey, I think one of the best poets of the last 100 years writing in English, which involves repeating the first line of each stanza as a refrain at the end of that stanza, and then at the very end of the poem bringing all the refrain lines together to form another stanza, sort of like in music it's called reprise. So Adam's Lament. Awakening for the deepest sleep God has ever imposed upon man, I tried to soothe with my hand my side, striving with the strangest soreness on earth. Then I saw you had appeared beside me, awakening from the deepest sleep. The universe and you were mine. Yours was my resolve to remain your mate, a love slave, totally loyal for all time. Together, we lacked nothing we could not have done without for another 1,000,000 years. The universe and you were mine. Those adult days were untimed. A primeval eternity was in the offing. We spent eons watching elephants and were the world's first ornithologists. We were intimates with all animals. Those idyllic days were untimed. I remained close to your unblemished belly, content to cuddle your virginal body, until you saw one day a snake slipping through a tight hole to strip off its old skin and gloating. You urged me to imitate its apparent pleasure. I remained close to your unblemished belly. I succumbed to your sense of adventure and thrust my uncircumcised member through a moist orifice into a place where no man or beast had ever been. You knew pain for the first time, I, a sly delight. I succumbed to your sense of adventure. Our post-climatic remorse was a vision of horror, a nightmare kaleidoscope of all the horrors of the world to come, inflicted by and upon our progeny. We previewed inquisitions, genocides, and saw the preternatural pink horses of Hiroshima. Our post-climatic remorse was a vision of horror. A fratricidal firstborn attributed his guilt to us, and all suffering people pointed their fingers in blame. Our initial instinct was to cover ourselves, a tacit plea of guilty, yet we still maintained the sin was not in the act, but in its shame. Our fratricidal firstborn attributed his guilt to us. The visions faded and you rose to walk away. In the deathly stillness, you voiced your only concern. I'm not a virgin anymore, am I? That was the beginning of knowledge, the Edenic end of wisdom. The visions faded and you rose to walk away. From behind, there was a sign of the cross, a cryptic promise in permanently creased flesh. It rose from your toes to the tops of your buttocks. But its bearer was not my Savior. There yet was none. For millennia to come, everyone would bear their own. From behind, there was a sign of the cross. Awakening from the deepest sleep, the universe and you were mine. Those idyllic days were untimed. I remained close to your unblemished belly. I succumbed to your sense of adventure. Our post-climatic remorse was a vision of horror. A fratricidal firstborn attributed his guilt to us. The visions faded, then you rose to walk away. From behind, there was a sign of the cross. You're going to slaughter the innocents?
Yes.
Okay. The next poem, titled Slaughter of the Innocents, begins with an epigraph, several verses from the Gospel of Matthew, 2nd chapter. And the poem was occasioned by the horrific tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut in December 2012. In this era, it seems like we're having mass shootings at least every week, several times a week it's going to be. This one seemed to open a floodgate, and I was profoundly moved, and I wanted to do something, but I was really unable to do much. I thought at least I could try to memorialize, as it were, the names of the 20 children killed in that tragedy, and it's dedicated to them. The poem also incorporates between the various stanzas the Lord's Prayer. So it begins with the quote from the Gospel of Matthew. Then Herod, when he saw he was mocked of the wise men, was exceedingly angry, and sent forth and slew all the children of Bethlehem. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, In Ramah was there a voice heard, lamentation and weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted because they are not. To say such a slaughter was bad is badly understated. Indeed, it was a monarchical monstrosity, a misdeed of biblical proportions. And 2 millennia later, how unlikely it would seem, as if in delirium or drug-induced dream, for Herod to appear anew in Newtown, Connecticut, a place so far removed, but no less bucolic than Bethlehem before his slaughter of the innocents. From the complacency of Christmas, a seasonal naivety we used to enjoy with impunity, we are awakened by Rachel weeping again, reeling like hell for Anna, Allison, and Abiel. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Before the curse of Herod overwhelms us, tell us, O Lord, pray tell us if truly this is thy will, that we must give you back little Benjamin, Jessica, and Jack. As we near another nativity of your own son, tell us what could be done with closets full of new clothes, trinkets, and tinker toys Rachel has bought with thought and caring for each of her precious little girls and almost baby boys. What will she do with all these gifts so lovingly selected, the boots and books, the bikes and games for Catherine, Caroline, and James? Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. But cut her some slack, merciful God, if Rachel is slow to forgive the Herod who broke her heart, the murderer of Madeline, Chase, and Charlotte. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. The evil of Herod's legacy is alive and lurks in our communal psyche, tempting us to accept, if not condone, the slaughter of innocents other than our own, in places as far-flung as Afghanistan and Hiroshima, even as we mourn and do not understand the killing so obscurely obscene of Olivia, Jesse, and Josephine. For thine is the kingdom. Let it be a gun-free place of peace, one where there can never be a slaughter of innocents, a celestial sanctuary where Rachel need never weep again, a scene of fun and never-ending sunshine, safe in Sylvan, for Daniel and Dylan, and the power and the glory. And now with hope that trumps despair, we commend to your care for the rest of eternity what was Rachel's fleeting glory in Grace and Noah and Emily, forever and ever. Amen. Earlier I mentioned that my good dad, wonderful man who raised me from infancy, bounced me on his knee, saw me off to the Army, welcomed me home, helped me through college, was not, as I learned only two years ago, at age 82, is not my birth father. I don't cherish his memory any the less, but it opened a new dimension to my life, and I met some wonderful new family, as it were. In fact, tomorrow evening, my Jewish half-niece will be in town with her husband, and we're having dinner with them. How I escaped the Holocaust. Until age 82, I never knew I was a half-Jew. Until age 82, and seduced into producing a vial of saliva for trendy DNA testing, truly, I thought I was purely one of the unchosen. As a young American soldier, after World War II wound down, I found myself stationed in Munich, the beautiful capital of Alpine Bavaria. Due to my newly discovered ethnicity, had I been born in that ancient city, I might have died in nearby Dachau or been boxcarred to faraway Auschwitz to slave away day after day after day, subsisting on water gruel or maggoty mush, until it was my turn to be gassed and burned to fervor the Fuhrer's satanic final solution. Phew. Although born in 1939, the fateful year the hateful despots' legions daggered peaceful Poland, I was born an ocean away, not in Munich or Paris or Amsterdam or any other European city where the lurking Gestapo could have pulled me from a playpen or snatched me from the street, beat me, armbanded me with a profane Star of David, reduced me to a tattooed number. Was I lucky to have been born too late to fight in that wretched war? And some might say consolingly, hell no. Knowing now this haunting half of my heritage, I just wish I had been one of the greatest generation. The reference being to those who fought World War II. And this is, of course, in memory of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust.
Eugene, read My Mother Stoned for sort of another perspective on your discovery of your Jewish heritage, if you wouldn't mind. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think the
right
contrast is, we're still good on time. We're good on time.
I trust. My Mother Stoned. Inasmuch as I was born in February 1939, apparently my otherwise virtuous mother had an encounter with a Jewish man in the spring of 1938. So that's the background for My Mother Stoned. Startled by my late-in-life DNA discovery, I asked myself, did my doting mother make a mistake, deserve to be stoned by an enraged man I grew up thinking was my father? Whether Bel or Jezebel, my mother coddled me continually as she cuckolded the trusting man who had raised me from infancy, a good man who worked his ass off to provide for family. So who am I to say? It was for posterity what the prophet said to the too eager would-be stoners of that woman caught in the act, the unpardonable act of adultery. I only know I cannot throw the first stone, and like my fellow Pharisees, I may just slip away.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions for Eugene? Yes, Dana.
Oh, wow. This is so official. I wonder if you journal. Do you write in a journal regularly?
A journal? No. But I'm glad you asked the question because it's something I should have been doing all my writing life. I write down little scraplets of that might become poems. I don't think of it as a journal, so I'm not into journaling, but I know a lot of poets do and other writers. So, no, I don't keep a journal.
Other questions? Yeah, Adam.
Eugene, I just love the poem about the massacre in Newtown. It's very powerful. I wonder how you decided to interpose what you wrote with the Lord's Prayer.
Father Adam, I don't know. When I started writing it, it just seemed to suggest itself. And maybe analogous to that is the idea, and I can't take credit for coming up with this initially, but poets will ask, how did you find poetry? And the answer being, I didn't find poetry, poetry found me. So it worked, and I just couldn't identify a specific moment when I said, oh, the Lord's Prayer would work well on this. As an aside to that and that tragedy, prior to that, I'd been very unenthusiastic about my granddaughters being homeschooled by my daughter up in upstate New York. I still remember that day after the tragedy, I became aware of it. I remember getting in touch with her and letting her know that I'd never complain about homeschooling again.
I agree with you, Adam. I think the poem is magnificent, actually. So incredible. Yes.
I want to agree with that. I think that's the most powerful of all your poems. And I've always thought that the use of the Lord's Prayer there, since the Lord's Prayer is saying, when thy kingdom comes, then thy will be done on earth as it is now done in heaven. This will be the kingdom of God. And that's the ultimate hope of the Judeo-Christian tradition, to create the kingdom in the midst of the human community where there is no killing and no ugliness of this kind. So to me, that's why you put it in, even if you're not going to tell. That's when I read the poem, it seems perfect. And then the use of Herod and the slaughter of the innocents really is a brilliant parallel. So it's a tremendously successful poem with a biblical reference and the prayer and the names of the children. It's really superb. Thank you.
Thank you, and you used the word successful, and to say that phrase that I mentioned earlier about successfully realized, started, I wanted to write something as a tribute and enshrine the names of the children who were killed. And when I finished, I felt it had been successfully realized. And in fact, the people as erudite as you feel good about it, and that was, I guess I accomplished that.
Yes.
No, I don't need it.
Okay.
I just wanted to make a comment about, first of all, Adam's Lament, which something I've seen in a number of your poems, and I guess in a lot of poetry, where it starts with beauty, and then it moves to something that's really awful, and then it moves back to the means of salvation. So there's kind of this movement. But the slaughter of the innocents just leaves you, I don't know. What can you say about it? We can't, it's sort of like we can't pull ourselves out of the horror of it.
I appreciate that observation. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's a magnificent poem, and I think everyone, the reaction of everyone is confirmation of that. So we've come to our final section with a brand new poem that Eugene is going to debut for us now, The Church of the Crooked Cross. Give us a little description and help us with the poem. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Walker. I guess I've been coming to St. Stephen's for about 20 years, and increasingly involved, spiritually involved, and it means a lot to me. And in the last year or two, particularly, I thought, gee, I'd like to write a poem, but no specific topic came to mind. At the very last page of your packet, you see a photo of a rector on the roof of the church. Father Adam posted this on his Facebook page 2 months ago, approximately. And when I saw it, that was it. The crooked cross. Had to do something with the crooked cross. So, and I don't think that, well, Father Adam could not have known until he got his own copy of the packet that the poem is dedicated to him with admiration and affection. By the way, the poem, it had to go down to about the third stanza before there's really any reference to St. Stephen's. The first two stanzas provide a setting, Charleston, the holy city, The Church of the Crooked Cross, lying far from the piney heart of the South, far out on its palmetted periphery, and dubbed, deservedly or not, the holy city, Charleston, with an infamous place in history as port of entry for 1,000 cargoes of captives in chains smuggled from Africa to slave away their days under hot sun or in frost, is wont to boast that is host to a plethora of places to pray, not least of which is an oasis of hope called the Church of the Crooked Cross. It sits on stylish Anson Street, perhaps out of place, but in humble splendor beneath a storm-tossed cross, a house of prayer for all people, a temporal haven for diverse faithful on the pothole journeys to eternity. And although long after that hurricane from hell left its rooftop cross, well, secured but crooked, it stoically extols the straight and narrow, And though its cruciform adornment may be askew, it honors mutely a storied Jew named Stephen, venerated by generations of true believers as first martyr of a new way to see God incarnate in a carpenter crucified.
Thank you very much.
Well, Eugene, stay up here as I offer my concluding comments. And this is, I did not know of that dedication, and thank you very much for that. Our Crooked Cross, as you all know, is one of my favorite things to talk about and to preach about. But as we conclude this evening, I have to say, Eugene, that I've always been touched by your faithfulness and by the heart that you show, the faith that you show in your writing, in your poetry, and the fact that I knew that you had decided to write a poem inspired by our own church inspires me to do something that I believe I'm empowered to do, and that is to give you the honorary title of Poet in Residence at St. Stephen's.
That's one of the highest honors of my life. Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's
Well,
go over
and with that, let's enjoy some refreshments over in Stevens Hall.